Okay. Now, the most important message that was put forward by Keynes was that don't ask us to wait for the long run, because in the long run we are all dead. Now, he said that the short-run fluctuations can create such amounts of unemployment in an economy that the whole system can end up breaking down. The whole system can actually be socially fractured. There could actually be a social rebellion which could actually endanger the capitalist economy itself. If the capitalist economy doesn't remain in that form, what is the point of waiting for the long run? And hence his statement, in the long run we are all dead. Right? What do you do in the short run then? So before that, what was the problem? The problem that the world economy faced in the 1920s was of severe demand shortage. Severe demand shortage. Firms were closing down on a large scale. People were being sent out of work. Unemployment was going beyond 10 to 15%. No new jobs were being generated. Wages simply could not act as any kind of balancing force in creating employment. And this increase of unemployment rose to such levels as to endanger the capitalist economy of the world and push it to the brink of a crisis of breakdown itself. And Keynes was, in some sense, no socialist, no Marxist, very mainstream economist, but who provided a kind of cure, in a sense, for the capitalist economy, so that that economy could be saved from a crisis. Right? Today's some economists of today think that Keynes was some kind of anything Keynesian, anything in terms of government intervention as a result is considered as a bad thing, as something which, or he might even risk being called a socialist, if not a communist. Okay? Keynes was, on the other hand, a thorough anti-communist. And he was actually providing a medicine, a treatment for the capitalist economy, so that it could be retrieved from the crisis of severe demand depression that it was into, in an economy where supply simply was not creating demand at all. Right? So, if the basic idea of Keynes here was that it is not adequate to simply talk about demand, you should actually be talking about effective demand. Right? Effective demand means I may desire a commodity, I may desire to buy a commodity, but I simply may not have the ability to buy that commodity. Only if I have the ability to buy a commodity can my desire, which is an innate desire within me, be translated into something workable, which is an effective demand, where I have the money and I go to the market and actually make the purchase possible. Right? If the desire is not translatable into effective demand, then there is no point talking about demand and supply clearing. And that translation of demand into effective demand may not simply be brought about by any free market force. Keynes said the experience of the 1910s and 20s, post-World War I period, actually showed that this kind of generation cannot be dependent upon the market forces alone. Market forces do not create full employment on their own, and hence you need a shift of thinking and policy where you actually move from reliance on markets, prices and so on, as the marginalist school was suggesting, and instead move to a policy regime where the role of the state becomes even more prominent. What is the role of the state? The role of the state here becomes to create something that the market was unable to create. To create something that the market was unable to create. What was that? Demand. Demand. How do you create the demand? How does the state create the demand? by putting money into the hands of people, as they call it, right? By putting money into the hands of people so that they can go and buy something and the demand goes up, right? How do you put the money into the hands of people? By creating opportunities, yes, but how do you create opportunities? Opportunities can also typically be created by expanding the market. That's what some people would say. So opportunities not in an abstract sense, but opportunities which are consciously generated by a government. Sure. Can we come to that in a while? Yeah. Okay. So the government should actually intervene in the economy to generate this demand. Okay. It can take many ways. It can take, for example, of creating employment. Okay. It can create a social security regime in which people do not end up paying from their pocket for health expenses. Instead, they can approach a government public health center where they are provided free treatment, so that the amount they would have otherwise given to a private hospital would actually be spent by them on the purchase of new commodities, which will actually create a new demand. Right? Am I right? I was giving 100 rupees for a private hospital. If I am getting free treatment in a public hospital now, that 100 rupees, instead of giving it to the private hospital, I may actually end up going to the market and buying something. And that may actually end up creating a demand in the economy. Yes, lady. Obama lives in a funny world where nobody wants the state. The Obama is basically saying, please, I'm giving you a free premium, take it. And the American public is saying, state, ooh, no. Right? That's a very funny country. Okay? Let's discuss that later. But even if that is required, Keynes would say that's the only way to save the capitalist economy. The capitalist economy created that dirt, that toxicity, and the only way to save the capitalist economy is for the state to absorb that toxicity. Right? It's a hard world. That's the only way to save the capitalist economy. Okay? As a result, that's why others say that capitalism moved from a crisis to an even greater crisis, to a greater crisis, to an even greater crisis, to an even greater crisis, right? And that becomes a habit of the system. Right? That's hence the problem. Leave that. We'll talk about it later. But the point Keynes made here was that if you have a demand shortage in the economy, then it might be required for the government to come in and create that demand, because you cannot wait for the long run for the markets to create that demand. That may never be created at all. So the main starting point for Keynes here is that firms produce to basically sell in the market. Right? A firm doesn't believe in Say's law. Right? The firm creates a product today so that it can be sold tomorrow, or even today evening or tomorrow morning. Right? They can have a gestation period, they can have a waiting period, but not beyond a point. And this, if it cannot sell tomorrow or cannot sell day after tomorrow in the short run, then what it will do is it will cut down its production. It will not overproduce indiscriminately. It will actually cut down its production to the extent that there is saleability, to the extent that there is demand in the economy. Right? If there is less demand in the economy, the firm will produce proportionately less based on a particular market forecast that it might have. Okay? So if they produce less, as a result, if they foresee the demand to be less, if they forecast the demand to be less, and hence produce less, there will actually be less employment in the economy. Am I right? They cut down production, they lay off workers, there will be more unemployment in the economy. A lot of people who were getting wages as part of it are not anymore getting wages. Right? As a result, what happens? No, unemployment, yes. Unemployment there is further demand constraint, right? Because first there is a demand constraint, as a result of which the company reduces, downgrades its market forecast and actually produces less. When it produces less, in that process it cuts down the workforce. And when it cuts down the workforce, it ends up not paying wages to a large number of people who are getting that wages till yesterday, right? And hence demand further falls. Right? When demand further falls, some other firm will close down. And that some other firm will close down, and then its workers are laid off, and then there is another round of demand fall. And then this cycle continues and really pulls the economy down into a severe problem of demand shortage, and there will be all-round crisis. You just came in, right? Excuse me. We just started the class. Where are you going? You didn't have time in the interval to do anything that you want to do now. Where? Outside means fresh air. So, if I can stand here for 1.5 hours without going anywhere, you can also sit. Okay. Now, if there is insufficient demand, firms will produce less. Produce less means less workforce, less demand, and then the cycle continues to create a swirl of demand shortage in the economy. As a result, the feature of a capitalist economy, Keynes said, the feature of a capitalist economy is a kind of a cycle which booms when there is high demand and busts when there is demand shortage. Booms when there is high demand and busts when there is demand shortage. That is the main feature of a capitalist economy. But how is demand generated? How is demand generated? There are two main sources of effective demand according to Keynes. The two main sources. The first is there is a demand for money that is created in the economy by companies who would want to use up a particular amount of capital for investment. Right? First, the demand for machines, demand for new tools, demand for buildings. All these are investment demand by firms. These are all demand, right? Which can actually create more employment. So that's one type of investment demand. That's one type of demand. That is investment demand. Okay. The other type of demand, according to Keynes, is called consumption demand. Right? So two types of demand are there in the economy. First, investment by firms, demand for machines, tools, buildings, plants, etc. And the lady there, orange shirt, sit straight, keep your legs down. Keep your legs down. What's in your hand? What were you trying to show him? Is that a nice picture that I can see? The lady was trying to, yes, you. Is everything fine? Yes, good. Okay. Now, the second kind of demand is consumption demand, where households may want to purchase shirts, footwear, shoes, soap, shampoo, right? All these are consumption demands, right? Now, if these two demands, investment demand by firms and consumption demand by households, are adequate enough, then there is no need for the state in a capitalist economy. Theoretically, there is no need for the state. Okay, but will that always be such? Will that always be so? Is capitalist economy marked by booms only? No. There will be a large number of periods where there will be constant demand shortage in the economy, as a result of which both investment demand by firms and consumption demand by households will be below what is required. As a result, the overall demand in the economy will actually be low. Okay? Now, everybody will not make investment demand, because if you want to invest in a machine, you will not spend hundreds of crores and invest in a machine for nothing. unless you think that there is a particular demand that is forthcoming for the produce that you will produce after the installation of that machine. Whose phone is that? Okay. कहाँ से आ रहा है देखना, वो बैग उठा के बाहर कर दो. Whose phone is that? You can own it up, you can switch it off, and you can sit back. I'm giving you an option now. Okay, now for both, you just disturb the flow of the class. Both in terms of investment demand by firms and consumption demand by households and workers, there will be long periods of time in a capitalist economy where the demand is pulled down, demand is low. And this might require the government to come in and substitute for private demand by pushing people to have more, companies to have more investment demand and households to have more consumption demand. Okay, there are many ways in which government can do this. Keynes said, do not worry about, for example, the following. Okay, if you have a public works program, what is a public works program? NREGS is a public works program, right? The government provides employment to people. A lot of people say this is waste. A lot of people say this is waste of money. But Keynes said, consider the following. In the morning, between 8 a.m. and 11 a.m., you ask workers to dig holes. Okay? Ask them to go for lunch, come back at 2 o'clock, and between 2 and 4 o'clock, ask them to fill them up again. At 5 o'clock, give them a daily wage. Is this a productive expenditure? Keynes said yes. Keynes said yes. Because even if you did not produce any productive asset at the end of the day, you dug a hole in the morning and then closed the pit in the evening, you ultimately did do one thing, which was you paid a wage to the worker who was not getting it till yesterday. Okay? Because you ended up paying that wage to the laborer, that laborer will actually go and spend it somewhere. And when millions of workers end up spending like that, then it will actually be one of the most extraordinary demand triggers that you might see in an economy. Okay? This could be interpreted in many ways. One of the main points that Keynes said was the idea of multiplier in the economy. The idea of multiplier in Keynes was the following. Suppose the government spends 1 rupee in the economy, its impact on the economy is likely to be much more than 1 rupee. How? How does it multiply? What is the process? No, you don't give 1 rupee to him. Yes. No, government pays you 1 rupee. So what happens? Or not someone, on something. Right? Yeah. On something. So you go and buy soap. Okay? Of 1 rupee. What happened? No, not 2 rupees worth. Your 1 rupee is lost. Not that value, I'm saying. If you spend that 1 rupee on the soap, for example, and there is a company which produces a soap which benefits out of your purchase, you means a lot of you go and purchase it, and talk to me. Okay, and a lot of people do that. Then, because the company will pay wage to somebody, that person will go and spend it somewhere, and thus the cycle goes on. I pay you, you buy something. That company pays wages to somebody, that laborer goes and buys something, its wages go up and go on. the ultimate impact of that 1 rupee that I spent on you as a government is much more than 1 rupee. So 1 in its outcome comes out as a multiplied 1. Okay? Similar is the impact of a reduction of government expenditure. If I reduce the government expenditure by 1 rupee, the extent to which demand will be reduced in the economy will be more than 1 rupee. It works both ways, right? Isn't it? Does it work both ways? If I spent 1 rupee and its impact is more than 1 rupee, if I cut down 1 rupee also, its impact should be more than 1 rupee, right? You can't have it both ways. Right? So this is the multiplier. Sorry, you had a question? Sorry. Blow. How? That's a problem that we'll see later. But it's a problem. It's a debate that is very different, which is a debate between a particular fiscal policy path and a monetary policy path. That's not the debate that is germane here. I'm answering him. Okay? That's not a question that is germane to this debate that we are having here. Let's postpone that to another lecture. Okay? And hence you don't need to answer him. Okay? Now, the question that we are, so the point about, yes. It's just a polemic, right? It's just Keynes was a great polemicist, right? In the sense that even if you do that, that's what he's saying. You can of course give free. You can of course, but even if you do that, suppose you don't want to give something free to anybody. Okay, ask them to come in the morning, dig a hole, evening, fill it up, give it up. So they have done some work. It's a reward for some manual work. Consider it like that. You didn't give anything free. It's a polemical argument. Don't take it too seriously. Yeah? So, like literally. Yeah. Subsidy. Subsidy could be one. For example, I'll give you one example. For example, the government was considering what is called as the Food Security Act recently. Right? What is the whole idea of the Food Security Act? For 3 rupees and 2 rupees, you give 1 kg of wheat and rice to people through the food security, through the public distribution system. When this was happening, because I don't want to give you a source which you will later say is biased and all that, the credit rating agency called CRISIL, hardly left wing, okay, the credit rating agency called CRISIL did a report on this, and they stated why the Food Security Act could be one of the major demand triggers in the economy. Okay? One of the arguments that they gave was, you are now currently buying rice and wheat at say 10 rupees, 12 rupees per kg from the market. You are actually now going to get it from the public distribution system at 2 or 3 rupees. So what happens to 10 minus 3 or 10 minus 2? You will actually end up spending it somewhere else. Okay? In other words, you are actually creating an 8 rupee extra expenditure per kilogram, 8 rupee worth extra demand in the economy per kilogram of rice or wheat that you are supplying through the public distribution system as part of your Food Security Act. They said it could actually turn out to be one of the most phenomenal demand triggers that Indian economy has ever witnessed. Right? So it's one way of looking at the problem. One way in which demand state can actually intervene. So you don't need to spend on, say, NREGS, for example. By subsidy also, you can actually create this kind of subsidy. Means you are buying at X rupees, you are subsidizing it, giving it as X minus Y, and that Y becomes a demand trigger, which is the extra expenditure you can now make, which you are not able to make earlier. Right? So these are different instruments that the state might have. Different instruments that the state might have. So, yeah. That's not true. 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 That's not true, my dear friend. You don't need to. It's not true. We'll spend the next 5 minutes discussing that. I'll give you references. Right? I'm not dumping you down. I'm seriously saying. Yeah? There is literature which says that you don't necessarily need to import. You may at the margins, but you don't need to import food at all in order to meet your demand.
It depends on gene on which we are basically gene of the food material. For example, if it is rice, it is thin gene availability in the world market. If you look at
Gene.
For example, we consider the
What do you mean gene?
gene is
Gene.
that is a type of consumption material. For example, it is rice.
What do you mean by gene? Let's postpone this. Yeah. Familia and NREGS are not they're apples and oranges. Okay, ideas are the same. NREGS is something that is created to provide employment and create demand in the economy. Okay, Bolsa Familia is an incentive that the payment that you give to the house. It's called conditional cash payment. It's not a direct cash payment. It's conditional cash payment. If the mother brings the child to the Anganwadi for a particular nutrition dose or an injection or a vaccination or whatever it is, upon fulfilling the need that vaccination was actually given to the child, the mother gets a payment. It's actually an incentive to draw the mother into the public health center or the Anganwadi. It's not a demand, it's not an effort to raise demand in the economy, which it might as an unintended consequence, but it is not exactly a demand generating instrument of public policy. Am I clear? Yeah. Yeah, in the case of Bolsa Familia, a conditional cash transfer, it is the intent is not demand generation. The intent is bringing the mother to the Anganwadi, right? They're different. Yes. Go ahead. The balance is important, but let's not discuss that here. Balance is important. Eh? Can we discuss that when we have a class on labor and employment? Can we? You are very unsatisfied. This fellow has just escaped from answering that question. No, I'm not doing that. I just have an agenda for this class, and this is not the time to worry about farmer-laborer issues, which is a topic for a different class. Okay? We'll consider that. Don't forget to ask me that question when I do the third lecture of my module 3. Remember this. Okay? Yeah. Yeah. You. Whatever you want to call it. How does it matter what you name it as? No, if this is an additional saving which people might spend, right? Might spend. Yes, might spend. But if you look at the spending portfolio of poor households, they spend almost all of their. They don't have any savings at all. They spend almost all of their incomes. Yes.
Do the people have that surplus of 8 rupees?
No, you're not getting the point. You are now buying from the market at 10 rupees. You can get now from the PGS at 2 rupees. Right? Earlier you were paying 10 rupees for a kilo. Now you are paying only 2 rupees for a kilo. You have saved 8. Have you? Have you? Yes. So you do something, you not eat that money, no? Either you put it in the bank, then it becomes a source for bank credit to different people, or you spend it on your own, right? But what is the difference?
People are just with what they have rather than buying for 10 rupees.
No. Let them do whatever they want. They will do something with that 8 rupees. They will do something with that 8 rupees, and everything that they do with that 8 rupees will create some demand. Am I right? That's what Keynes said. It will happen. Yes. Allow him that 10. Let him buy a 10. That. No. Organically, 98 rupees. It only. No, it doesn't. Get your maths right. It doesn't. He just has 100 rupees. That's his income. That's a separate debate that we are getting into. Okay. Even if let me say this. Even if you are subsidizing the rich. It will still have a demand trigger. Right? Of course, if you transfer to the poor, it will have a better demand trigger. Right? Which is what I am coming into towards the end of this lecture. Okay? We'll introduce the element of class into this whole government expenditure debate. Let me continue. Yes? Come to? When it comes to an end, it will come to an end. I don't know. It might taper off at some point. It might taper off for different commodities, different kinds of expenditures, different places, different times. It may taper at different times. Right? Well, it depends. Now, a third way of doing it would be a government strategy could be social security. Okay? I gave you already an example of health. Instead of paying to a private hospital, you go and get treated in a public hospital, and the rest you are able to save and spend on something, which again acts as a major demand trigger. Okay? So there are different ways in which the government can spend directly on employment programs. Okay? The government can provide subsidies, or the government can create massive social security programs which act as some kind of demand triggers. So there are different ways in which the Keynesian idea can be actually implemented on the ground. But all of them have the common objective and the common outcome also of generating demand in the economy in one way or the other. So if you look at the United States economy of that period, demand constraint was pervasive in the United States economy. In the period of the First World War, 1914 onwards, there was a short period because of the war when prices of agricultural products in United States significantly went up because of the demand created by the war, by the First World War. So prices ruled really high by the middle of the 1910s, 1915, 1916, 1917, prices were really high. Okay? So farmers had really an incentive to produce more. Okay? When farmers produce more and more, ultimately when the war ended and other economies which had limited exports and all that restarted their production, okay, world prices began to fall again because the wartime demand had ceased to exist anymore. Okay? And when the demand fell after the war, all the prices of agricultural commodities across the board, not just in United States but also in Europe, fell very sharply, and as a result the farmers in United States and Europe also across during the 1910s and later part of the 1910s and the 1920s actually faced a serious problem of demand shortage. Because overproduction was happening and this production was not being absorbed into the economy in any form. Okay? People would ideally think that prices would fall. Okay? If prices fall, people would automatically increase the consumption of the commodity, and then actually you will get back through a demand-supply interaction back to a higher price or at least an equilibrium price. But this did not happen. Neither did supply, in terms of overproduction of food grains, create its own demand in the economy. Prices remained low. The farmer of the United States was usually called as the sick man of the 1920s. There's the usual phrase that is used in the United States. The sick man of the 1920s in the United States was the farmer, because he was the person who was most severely affected by the fall of prices of agricultural goods in the post-World War demand shortage. Right? As a result, when agricultural incomes fell as a result of price of agricultural products falling, there was large-scale, widespread demand fall across the economy. Rural demand significantly fell in the United States. And as rural demand fell significantly in the United States, this also affected the demand of non-agricultural goods, non-agricultural industrial goods which were produced outside rural areas also, because who will buy machines? Who will buy the tractors which are produced by the industrial houses? The farmers. But the farmers are not buying it anymore because they are not investing in agriculture anymore. Why are they not investing it in agriculture anymore? There is no demand for agricultural products, and the agricultural prices are really low. So you have the spillover of the demand shortage from the rural areas, from agriculture to urban areas, to non-agricultural occupations as well. And hence, the demand shortage spreads like an epidemic across the economy, and you have a serious problem of unemployment. Okay? In the United States context, what ultimately led to what is called as the Great Depression of 1929 was actually brought about by over a decade of consistent growth of demand shortage. Okay? But this was not the only cause for world depression, of course, the Great Depression, of course. There are other factors as well. For example, the kind of speculation that existed in the growing stock markets of that period. Okay? This was a period when joint stock companies listing in the stock markets and all was growing on a significant scale across, and there was significant speculation that was happening in these stock markets. A major feature of that, I will not get into the theory of this here. If the major problem with a boom in the stock market is you have a particular base value for a commodity or a share. You have a particular base value of a commodity or a share. Now, you are listing it in the stock market, its price actually goes up. Okay? While the real value of assets that underlies that share might remain unchanged, there could be an increase in value of that share through speculation, which may have no relationship at all with the real value of that share. Am I right? Okay? But ultimately, when a lot of economic activity takes place based on the inflated price of the share, which is not related at all to its actual price, okay, when a lot of economic transactions take place, and ultimately when something goes wrong somewhere and everybody starts demanding cash, there is no cash, because the whole difference between the original price and the existing market price is actually speculatory inflated price. That amount simply doesn't exist. Right? You speculate a 10 rupee share into a 50 rupee share. Where is the 40 coming from? The price of a share is 10 rupees. Its value in the stock market is 50 rupees. Where is the 40 coming from? From anything new? Is there anything new that is produced that is 40 rupees worth, which is causing this differential to exist? No. It is based on a particular price forecast, which is based on an expected profit forecast, right? Till that point it is fine. But when that profit forecast fails and something goes wrong, then what happens? And when people start demanding in this whole transaction that occurred between 10 and 40 or 10 and 50, people start demanding cash in between. There is no cash because it was all built one upon the other without any real addition to the value base. And then the whole economy starts to break down. Because a lot of people would have made transactions in this 10 to 50 borrowing from banks. Banks themselves may have bought a lot of shares in companies. A lot of value of, it's like State Bank of India lent to Vijay Mallya. Okay? State Bank of India said, boss, you have 2,000 crores to give me back. So Vijay Mallya says, okay, let's create a compromise. Okay? I'm giving you an illustration. The amounts are different. He says, okay, you please reduce it to 1,000 crore. Okay? The rest 1,000 crore, I will give you Kingfisher company shares worth 1,000 crores. So SBI says, okay, fair enough. Okay? Let me underline, the numbers are different, but the phenomenon did indeed take place. So SBI says, okay, I'll take this 1,000 crore and I'll take these 1,000 crore worth shares and reduce your loan amount to the remaining 1,000 crore. People think, oh, fine. But now what is the situation? The company itself doesn't exist. Where is 1,000 crore? It vanished into thin air, right? It is this difference between 10 and 50 that Marx calls in his work Capital as fictitious capital. 10 is the real capital. 10 to 50, that 40 is actually called fictitious capital. It's an illusion. 50 minus 10 is an illusion. And when the economy is booming, nobody realizes this. Because I'm transferring my risk to you, you are transferring your risk to her, it goes on like that. Nobody really figures out that there is a problem. The problem is realized when there is something goes wrong somewhere, and then you say, okay, I don't want it. I gave this to you yesterday, you give it back to me, I want cash. Where is the cash? There's no cash. Right? And you say, of course it's on paper, but the paper has no value. Paper used to have a value when it was booming. The paper doesn't have a value when it is busting. Right? Suddenly, once upon a time, people said, in the early 2000s, I think, people said, Azim Premji is the richest man in Asia. Okay? People said, how is the richest man in Asia? What asset does he have? He just has an IT company. Right? A flourishing IT company, of course. But richest man in Asia? Then how is it valuated? Based on the existing value of shares. Tomorrow when the share value falls, he's no more the richest man. Did he lose anything? Did he sell his company? Nothing happened. His company is there, but his valuation has come down. Right? But that's okay. But yesterday he was the richest man, today he is not the richest man, that's fine. But if a lot of transactions have taken place in the marketplace based on his richest man status, based on the high price of shares which existed at that point of time, which today you want to realize when the boom has actually ended, when the bust has set in, then you are in trouble. Right? This is the problem. This is a second problem that can come in when your economic process is not rooted in real production, but it is rooted instead in pure speculation. Okay? This was another serious issue that came up in the United States at that point of time. Keynes had a very sharp comment to make on this phenomenon. He says, speculators may do no harm at all as bubbles on a steady stream of enterprise. Okay? If speculators are bubbles on a steady stream of enterprise means production. There is a steady stream of production, and there is some bubbles of speculation here and there is no problem. Speculators do no harm as bubbles on a steady stream of enterprise. But the position is serious when the enterprise becomes a bubble. Not the speculator. The enterprise becomes a bubble on a whirlpool of speculation. There's a whirlpool. You know what's a whirlpool? The whirlpool of speculation, and the enterprise is a bubble in that whirlpool of enterprise. Then it's a trouble. When speculation goes out of hand. when the capital development of a country, Keynes says, when the capital development of a country becomes the byproduct of the activities of a casino, okay, then the job is likely to be ill done, badly done. The capital development of a country cannot be hostage to the, or be held as a byproduct of the activities of a casino or the stock market or speculation. Yes, was a question? There was a question? Every breakdown in the stock market is a result of this realization problem, right? In one way or the other. Okay. There are of course violation of rules and always take place, right? But it's a much more complicated. But the real problem with this kind of speculative transaction is this, right? Is very poor. There is no relationship between the two. It's a notional value. 50 is a notional value. Yes. Yes. That's what the chairman of Citibank, chairman or president of Citibank, Charles Prince, said in 2008. Somebody plays the music and we start dancing. Okay? Today we know that there is a problem. We just can't stop dancing because the music is on. I have to keep dancing till the music is on. There's no escape from it. You're into that whirlpool. Right? So let me move to the third. So first problem was a demand constraint. Second problem was the overdose of speculation. Okay? And the third problem was, of course, extreme inequality that existed in these economies at that point of time. I'll give you an example of United States. Okay? I'm going to take 3 years, 1919, 1923, and 1929. Okay? And this is the share of the top 1%, and this is the share of the top 5%, okay, incomes, okay. 1919, 12.2, 13.1, and top 1% in the American economy, okay. Okay, you take the top 5%, you're already 1/4, okay. Regardless of whether it increases or decreases, you're already at 24. Okay? Oh, I'm sorry. Is that okay? Yeah. This was the American economy of that point of time. Right? In other words, in the presence of such high levels of inequality, even if there is an increase in demand that happens somewhere, it actually happens only in a very small top cream. Right? Inequality, in other words, is one of the biggest enemies of any sustained demand increase. In the presence of huge inequalities, inequality itself, even if the government spends in the economy, the high levels of inequality may actually stymie the benefits of that multiplier effect that the government expenditure can actually create. Right? So inequality is a problem in itself because it constrains a lot of other changes that might take place in the economy. So you have a problem of demand constraint, you have a problem of speculation, you have a problem of huge rise in inequality. Okay? Now, the solution to this problem that was suggested at that point of time by Keynes, as I just suggested, was an increase of expenditure of the government. An increase of expenditure of the government by more intervention of the state in the economy. Can you bypass this demand constraint? That was the idea that Keynes experimented with. Now, for instance, Roosevelt was the United States president at that point of time. In 1933, faced with the most severe depression ever in history, he introduced what is called as the New Deal. The New Deal. New Deal, in other words, was a set of policies which was designed by the United States government in order to fight the pernicious impacts, outcomes of the Great Depression. Okay? What did he do? What did he do as part of the New Deal? Usually in India we talk about the first 100 days, right? The first 100 days, Modi saab ke 100 din, kind of, Manmohan Singh ke pehle 100 din. Okay? But here, there was a New Deal ke 100 din. Okay? What was the first 100 days of the New Deal? They passed more than 15 to 20 bills in the economy, in the parliament. Okay? What were these bills? These were historic 15 to 20 bills which were passed. Historic. Okay? What were they? A, they passed what is called as the Emergency Banking Act. Okay? Emergency Banking Act, which reopened the banks under what amounted to government supervision, in sometimes even government ownership. So all the private banks which were actually had gotten into a crisis as part of the speculatory project of the 1920s were now either taken over by the government or nationalized. Right? They were not privatized. They were made from private to public. Right? They were nationalized, absorbed their losses, nationalized, taken into public ownership, if not public ownership, public regulation, significant public regulation, and the speculatory activities of these firms were really brought down. Okay? Now, financial markets don't like this. If you do this in a boom period, financial markets will dumb you down by cutting down census by some 5,000 points. And you will call it Black Monday, Black Friday, Black Thursday, and so on. Right? Here you have a government coming in and saving the economy, which got into a problem thanks to speculation, by actually nationalizing the banking structure. Second, they established what is called Civilian Conservation Corps. Civilian Conservation Corps, which was basically intended to absorb the young unemployed youths into the workforce by active intervention and spending of the government. So there will be government schemes, or there will be corps. Corps, you understand? Sorry. Corps? Right? Something like the NSS, National Service Scheme, or a little more than that as well, where you draw poor, unemployed young into it and give them an allowance or a small salary to do some kind of relief work, voluntary work, and so on. That is the second thing. They passed also what is called as the Federal Emergency Relief Act in order to supplement the exhausted relief facilities in states and cities. A lot of relief work for the unemployed, including food supply, was begun in this period. Okay? This was one of the early phases where the overproduction of the agricultural sector, the overproduction in the agricultural sector of the United States was actually used to provide relief to poor people who are needy and who are hungry. They did not allow it like India does for them to become food for rats. Okay? This particular act helped the economy, helped the government to use that overproduction of food grains to provide relief to the poor across the United States. They had something called the Emergency Farm Mortgage Act, okay, according to which the loans that were given by public banks to agriculture and to farmers were quadrupled 4 times. Public banks, they were actually quadrupled in this period. There was something called the Tennessee Valley Authority Act. The Tennessee Valley Authority Act was the first effort of the United States government, one of the first efforts of the United States government to create public sector enterprises, public sector industries. right? This was a wholly new venture into what is called as government enterprise in the United States. Today you talk about privatization. Government was actually starting new enterprises under what is called as the Tennessee Valley Authority Act. Then came the real tiger, which is called the Glass-Steagall Banking Act. The Glass-Steagall Banking Act. There were two parliamentarians, one was Mr. Glass and one was Mr. Steagall, who actually introduced this bill, according to which, why is there so much of coming in and going out? Just restrict it a bit. Thanks. The Glass-Steagall Banking Act, which extremely limited how much the banks can actually invest in the stock market. How much exposure can banks have to the stock market? Okay, earlier, a lot of the speculation was actually created by banks investing in the stock markets. Right? Now, here the new rule said the banks cannot be exposed to the stock market beyond a very small minimal amount. Right? In fact, that's one of the most important demands of the industry today, that banks should be allowed to freely fund and interact in the stock market, which the Glass-Steagall Act at that point of time had restricted significantly in order to cut down on speculation. It had actually also passed something called the Securities Act, which curbed stock market speculation. In 1935, for example, the United States passed what is called as the Social Security Act. Okay? In 1936, they introduced the Social Security number, which continues even today. Okay? Based on which a set of Social Security benefits are provided to the working people based on a Social Security Act. There was a relief organization which was established. Nearly 1 out of every 7 Americans was receiving some kind of government relief at this point of time. 1 out of 5 families was dependent on some kind of public support. Okay? There was a new act called the Wagner Act, W-A-G-N-E-R, which protected labor union rights, which restricted free hire and fire, okay, which allowed trade unions to grow and flourish in the economy. In 1938, there was something called the Fair Labor Standards Act, which established minimum wages in the United States. Okay? Established minimum wages in the United States. It fixed maximum hours of work for laborers per day, and it also banned by a legal fiat child employment in any kind of interstate commerce. Right? So a series of steps, including minimum wage provision, which actually was resisted by the earlier school of thought as something that would distort the prices in the economy, were actively brought in, institutionalized, and given legal sanction under the New Deal of 1933. Okay? So in other words, New Deal was an institutional change. This was an institutional change. Right? Government came into the economy, spent in the economy. If required, it borrowed and spent in the economy. Okay? It restricted different forms of speculation. It even nationalized banks. It even went into starting new government enterprises and industries in the economy. Okay? And it created a whole new economic regime where the state came to be playing a very dominant role in not just reviving the economy for a short period, but also running it for a longer period of time. Right? This is the sum total of what is called as the Keynesian revolution. The idea that Keynes pushed forward came to be accepted by the governments like United States, and this led to a wholly new policy regime where demand constraint was sought to be addressed by active state intervention and spending, which included spending, which included subsidies, which included social security. Okay? Move to England, Great Britain. A lady here was speaking about national health system. Okay? In 1942, right in the middle of the war, the United Kingdom established what is called as the Beveridge Commission. William Beveridge, a very renowned scholar of that time, was appointed to head a commission which is called the Beveridge Commission. The Beveridge Commission actually said, as part of its report in 1943, that the government of the United Kingdom should cover all the needs of its people from cradle to grave. Right? From policies which cover all the basic needs of people are provided free by the government from birth to death.